I love how that sounds. And based on my roots, my father being from the Bahamas, I approve of that message.
Ah, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
It's my pleasure.
Rickson Campbell basically recommended you to me, and we were developing the magazine, the one that he now has, where you were on the cover for the premiere. Yeah. So, you know, my thing to him was he was going to be the one that's going to go on the cover, and I said, Rickson, you don't want to be on the cover. You want someone else in the industry to be on the cover, and you can still get your objective out, you know, but you want someone else. So immediately you came to mind. I said, well, there's nothing wrong with us asking. You're going to either get a yes or a no, right?
I rarely say no, and it was definitely my pleasure. So absolutely. I enjoy his personality. He's a lot of fun. He was very humbled to be asked. So thanks.
You do know that he's a chef, right?
I did hear that. He shared that with me.
Yes. Used to cook some great meal back there in Jamaica.
Nice.
So together, that's great. So I wanted us to take the time out just to get your perspective on tourism and technology, where we are now, where we were last year during the pandemic. We're still going through it, but it's not as critical, and we're more knowledgeable now than we were last year. And and what are some of the new things that you think we could be leveraging and pivot throughout this time? So before I even jump into that, is why did you go into tourism?
You know, I'm like so many other people, George. I kind of fell into tourism, if you will, you know, not understanding back in the 80s when I finished college that this was a career path, and being really ignorant to how vast the hospitality industry is. You know, when someone approached me, I was living in Savannah, Georgia, and I had very mixed feelings about being there because I, you know, was born on the West Coast, and I wanted to move out and go somewhere else. Okay. I was approached by the guy that ran the Savannah Convention and Visitors Bureau, who was on the board of the company that I worked for right out of college. And my first reaction was, I don't want to work in a hotel or a restaurant or do tours. I'm embarrassed for you for thinking that that's what I could do. You know, how dare you? It was his ignorance. And as I tell young people, I'm like, I didn't have the luxury of a smartphone that I could immediately look it up and figure out, you know, no, at all. So I fell in the industry recognizing my interest in tourism, my interest in travel, the exposure that I had growing up, and the trips my father would take us on, and say, you know what, this is something that I really would enjoy doing. So
there we go.
So
wow, 30 years.
Fast forward, I was there. I was in Savannah for about 3.5 years, Atlanta for 10 years. I've been here. This is my 20th year in DC.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you see a difference? I know we've traveled to Atlanta a lot of times as far as the energy, the vibes of the people in Atlanta. It's different. You know, I mean, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, originally from Jamaica, but live in Brooklyn, New York. The vibe is just completely different as well. When I visited DC, that was way back. That was, I don't know if you remember, that was the Million Men March.
I do remember that.
You do remember it. Okay, so that's that was the time when I went there, and things have changed, I'm sure. But looking at where you were in Atlanta, now you're in DC. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, you know, I moved to DC literally 2 months after 9/11, and I moved to DC because of 9/11. You know, I loved Atlanta. I loved my job, but like so many people, after something detrimental, such as 9/11 hits, you're thinking about, you know, am I settling? And it's not about Atlanta, it's about my opportunities within the company. Or my plan was every 4 or 5 years to move somewhere else. And I'm already not doing that, you know, and I'm like, and I still am, you know, and the reality with this industry is that I don't have to move. I can just travel to those places. But, you know, I think that the way I look at Atlanta is that it's an amazing city.
Yeah.
And I sold it as if it was the best city in the world, as anyone should. But I realized when I moved here and I went back, some of the things that customers would say about downtown Atlanta that I just didn't see: lack of retail, lack of continuity in downtown, because everything is done in the suburbs, shopping, eating out, what have you. And downtown had a lot of amazing infrastructure for meetings, but it wasn't the place that tourists would go for fun. And so moving to DC, another city that's very much so populated by a very strong and gregarious Black community.
Right.
I like the region, and I appreciated the region more simply because in Atlanta, if you travel 4 hours in any direction, you're in a small town. And in Washington, D.C., if you start going north, you're going to hit some pretty amazing metropolitan areas that have a lot of great history and populated by a large international community. And I appreciated that much more.
Okay. Got it. What's your passion?
Professionally, it's really when I'm looking out of the window of my office and I see a large number of people in town because they're here for a meeting or convention, I'm very passionate about the fact that we're doing a major job in stimulating economic development and economic impact.
Sure.
So I love people. I love knowing that this industry means something to this destination. As I've gotten older, George, my passion has become more about giving back.
Yeah.
So making sure that the generations that are coming into the industry now are looking at life and looking at the industry perhaps through a different lens. Whereas when I entered, there was one person that looked like me that was a CEO. And unfortunately, I wasn't surprised by that. And now, 30 years later, they're 10. And I'm very surprised by that. So my passion is tied to making sure that our industry focuses on some of the disconnects within the industry, especially for Black, brown people and other groups of people that feel like they've been marginalized. And equally as much, making sure that those that are in the industry at the entry level feel that there are opportunities for them to move up within the industry.
Got it.
And that did not exist for me. I just had my own drive. I was, where I was brought up, but I wasn't necessarily people that I could call on other than one or two people. Outside of that, my passion is just enjoying life. I know we're talking from a professional perspective, but we were taught, George, to work hard, work lots of hours, follow the protocol, and then enjoy life later. But I've learned that it's okay to want to enjoy life and to work hard at the same time.
The balance.
And my generation, we wanted to make the big bucks, work hard, make the big bucks. Whereas this generation is like, I want to be compensated well, but I really want to enjoy life.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with you on that. And I just wanted us to know again, just to what drives you, what do you live for, outside of the office, what keeps you in the industry with all of the things that are happening now, what's keeping you here, so what's keeping you?
Well, I think that, there's several people that have said, if you go to work every day and you feel like it's a job, you're in the wrong career field.
Okay.
And I don't ever feel like this is a job. I really am passionate about coming to work and doing my job. I work on having an amazing life outside of work, but I really enjoy this. So what keeps me going is, you got to look at, when there are obstacles. And in DC, I came here at 9/11, then we had the massive anthrax scare that was killing people. And then we had a sniper that was killing people. And we've had 6 government shutdowns since I've been here. We had the January 6th insurrection. These things drive me to make sure that I focus on calibrating and getting DC back on track.
Nice.
I could never represent a destination that I don't have passion for or that I don't believe in. And so therefore, for me, it's kind of all tied together.
Great, great. How do you mitigate that though? I mean, you have, like you mentioned, I forgot everything about the sniper. That was big in that back then. We were just dropping. You know, you didn't want. Should you go to Maryland? Should you go to DC? Where's it safe? And even in New York, when I was in New York, then we were even worried that, wait, would it come this far? But so how do you navigate bringing in tourists, bringing in people to enjoy the destination, the experience, while balancing this? What's the offense defense strategy do you use?
Yeah, you really focus on, like, for example, January 6th, the interesting thing is that nobody's traveling. But let's say that travel industry was robust and this was during our peak season.
Sure.
You focus less on how poorly it was managed by security, but focus more on what will happen post then to make sure people are safe. After 9/11, I moved here. My family was like, my grandma with her accent, like, no, you can't go there. It's not safe. I'm like, no, actually, DC is the safest place probably in America right now, in New York. And so you focus on the things that are in place to make sure people feel safe. You focus on the fact that there's no place on earth that is void of terrorism and or void of some degree of incident potentially happening. I was in Paris 4 or 5 years ago, literally landed when the attack happened there. I was in London the day that the guy was on the bridge, London Bridge, and was and rolling over people. These things happen, and you do want people to you don't want to pretend like they're not happening, but you also want to focus on the response to it in a positive way, and the lessons learned to make sure that people feel safe. But you also want to be realistic, because I cannot, when people come to a major city from other parts of the if they come from a small town USA to an urban environment, we also have to make sure they're aware of what they cannot do in an urban environment that perhaps they can do in their big city. In their small town. So yeah, and but we're also dealing with, in a city like Washington, there could be a negative thing that happens in another part of the US, and then we start getting the calls, well, maybe we don't want to come because DC is the nation's capital, DC is always on these lists, maybe we won't come. And I continue to tell people, you've got to do what you're most comfortable with doing. I will tell you that this is where we're doing. I will tell you, I don't feel unsafe being in Washington, which is a reoccurring question when I'm traveling internationally by the press. Do you feel safe when you're in Washington, when you're in the US? So
got it. That's good. I guess I'm going to just run through some of these. You had a chance to look through some of the questions.
I did.
I may not even ask all of them, but at least you prepared you, right? We're just going to just have a nice conversation. It's Friday, right?
It is.
Yeah. So
that's supposed to mean something, but now
I don't know, but we're going to find out. So here's the question, right? So while COVID-19 was the worst crisis the industry has faced, are there experiences and benefits that domestic and international destination can profit from?
Yeah, I think that, one, I never believed in closed-minded styles of management, like, oh, we've done it this way, so we should always, this is the way it's going to be done. And I think, if nothing else, COVID has forced the industry and travelers to really think differently about doing business. For example, within the meetings world, those associations that never, ever, ever offered a virtual option for attendance are probably going to offer a virtual option for attendance. There's nothing like face-to-face meetings, but instead of having 12,000 people at your meeting in person, why not have 15,000 with 3,000 of them virtually? So I think you're going to see some of those dynamics change. You're going to see the way we deal with health and safety. You already are seeing it. Right now, if you go to a website of a hotel, yes, I want you to tell me how amazing your suite is and how great your food and beverage experience is, but I also want to know what your safety protocol is to deal with the pandemic.
Right.
Do you have safety protocols? So make sure that, those things are now priorities. I was talking to someone earlier. I'm like, I've been attached to my wife for 21 years. I said, but just imagine being single now, and on your social dating profile, you have to say vaccinated, in addition to all the other things that you have to add.
Oh my God, you're right.
And when you travel now, I saw that Royal Caribbean is now selling only cruises for people that have been vaccinated in 2022. So in essence, if you haven't been vaccinated, you can't get on this boat.
Wow.
So all those things are going to change have changed the dynamics of how we do business, and perhaps how we think differently. The office environment. Yes, I'm physically in my office.
Right.
A year ago, I had 90 people in the office. For the last year, I've had about 4 or 5. And for those who were on the fence or absolutely not, working remote doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Out of necessity, it has had to work. So why not? What trends have we learned, and what does that mean as we move forward?
How about partnership, where it comes to partnering with like the health department? I know I used to manage, or was the agency of record for a destination in Florida, but we never sat down at the table and have meetings with the head of the health department or the risk management department. No, we don't have conversation with them, but now, how important is it now to have the health department or representative from the health department to sit at the table in the planning and development of a strategy?
Yeah, and here's the difference. In Washington, D.C., we've been doing it for years. We've been doing it since 9/11, out of necessity. When you have as many moving parts, well, one, there's over 20 policing agencies in the city. That could be great, or it could be a Keystone Cops routine.
Sure.
Of who's on first and people running into each other. So, when we are hosting APAC, American Israel Political Action Committee, a level of security that convention has is probably parallel to what most countries have for their heads of state. Even the buses are going through the city with police escorts.
Wow.
So we've had those relationships out of necessity in place for a long time. We've actually had someone sitting in my director of communications, sitting in the room with in the bullpen, if you will, on several occasions during the inaugurations, which take place every 4 years. So those cities that did not have that in place clearly are catching up to what we've been doing for a long period of time. We have the police department come into our offices and talk to our team and know who our team is, and for them to understand what we're doing in terms of visitation in the city, people walking down streets, and we need them to be in lockstep with what we're doing. And of course, with the federal government in our own backyard, I've been actively involved as chair of the U.S. Travel Association and getting to know all the secretaries there, and on various committees within the Department of Commerce that I've been able to leverage, be it Homeland Security, the folks that are in charge of security at airports. These things we've been doing for years.
Man, that's great. Now, how would rural destination and the smaller towns, how they don't have all of these traffic that you're talking about, like a New York, a DC, or California, any other of the larger cities and destinations normally will have on a day-to-day basis? How do they need to incorporate some of these other government agencies at the table?
They absolutely need to have a plan. They absolutely need to have that line of communication. Cities like New York and Washington, D.C., we could have 3 heads of state, different countries in our city every single day, and you don't know it. You might not know it until you see a faction of people that are protesting that leader's presence in Washington, D.C. But the people that are in charge, the Secret Service, the U.S. Park Service, the Capitol Police, they all know these things. And sometimes they're tied to conventions. So, but to your point, the President of the United States vacillating through Washington, D.C., it's not a big deal. It's a way of life. It's a tourist attraction. For those of us who live here, when we see the police motorcycles staged in different streets, we got to figure out, okay, I'm trying to leave to go home soon, so I better, but whereas when I lived in Atlanta, when the president of the United States came, it was a big deal. Streets shut down. And
Yep.
So I think my reason for saying all this is that every city should have a plan in place. Every city should have some level of communication with those that are in charge of security, healthcare, all those variables, because you never know when they'll be needed. Also in DC, we leverage them for meetings as well. Like when we are having a major convention that's coming in town that might be scientifically based, I can reach out to the National Institute of Health and talk to the person that might be in charge of something tied to that particular convention. And all of a sudden now they have a head speaker, or they have someone that's talking to that is going to offer a track that may not even been on their mind that the National Institute of Health is working on. So if I leave DC, I realize those resources are in my backyard, but I remember I will work to leverage what is there. Who has retired to my city that I can say, hey, you were the chief of OBGYN. We've got this group that's coming in that is, would you work with us to make sure they know how they can have a great meeting in this destination?
How do you do that though, Elliott? How do you tap into those that are retired and are relocating to the city?
For DC, what we do is we actually have a small association of people that are actively working in specific career fields that we work with. The head of American Association of Medical Colleges used to be the secretary of the Smithsonian, which is where I got to know him. So if we're working with a medical show that's looking at coming to Washington, D.C., he's now a part of that consortium that I'm going to call on to say, I need you to talk to this individual. The head of the National League of Cities, not only is a personal friend that I've known since 1994, but he runs National League of Cities, who also, their membership are all the elected officials in cities and states. I'm going to reach out to him and say, well, hey, I need you to help me to get to know the new mayor of this particular city. So that's the benefit here. If I wasn't, and then they will know who their peers are that might have retired in DC, because there's so, this region is so, filled with amazing people with great skill sets, former generals. I got an email recently from the American U.S. Army Association, which is headquartered in D.C. It's a former 3-star general. He's now in charge of PR, retired, but this is what he does. And I'm like, so I got social media, I got all this stuff. My team will Google him and I'll find out what he did. And then when I'm talking to him, I'm like, by the way, here are 3 associations that we're working to bring to Washington, D.C. And your expertise could help. Could I use you as an ambassador to perhaps get them to bring that meeting to the city?
That's good. Wow, that's great. The crisis is a shared problem, right?
Yeah.
Somehow we are, I know destination marketing companies and destination management organizations, sometimes we don't talk to each other. Even if our cities are close by, we tend to, we're saying that we're going after the same audience, our guests, right? But seeing that this is a shared problem that we're facing, can we share the revenue if we partner together and collaborate? I know the bed tax dollar is important. So I know, how do you calculate that this person is coming in? Do they need to stay in my city for 3 days and stay in yours for 2 days? How do you share the bed tax revenue?
We have a collaboration. And again, here's where DC is so unique, because Maryland and Virginia I could be in either one of those states in 10 minutes. So therefore, someone could be attending a meeting in DC, but stay in Virginia because the Pentagon is across the river, or stay in Maryland because Marriott is headquartered in Maryland. So we've, out of necessity, have had that dynamic, whereas we've collaborated. We actually, as a region, state of Maryland, state of Virginia, DC, have an organization called Capital Region USA, whereas we all invest heavily in them helping us market the region to the international market, because we recognize the fact that an international traveler is not like an American traveler that'll be here for 3 to 5 days. They're going to be here for 2 weeks.
Correct.
So therefore, they recognize the fact that for the most part, DC is the glue. We don't have that degree. I don't have that arrogance when I'm talking to them. Everyone's important. Our airports are in the state of Virginia. One airport is in the state of Maryland. But we all collaborate. We all work well together. If it is a convention, I always say that very few conventions meet the same city every year. Mm-hmm. Later this afternoon, around 2:00, I'm on a Zoom with the CEO, Martha of Boston, Fred in New York, Greg in Philly, and Al in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. We talk all the time. We talk about strategy. Right now, we're talking about reopening our cities, but we throw ideas off of each other all the time. It's in my opinion, it's economic development through tourism is not one-dimensional, especially if it's the leisure side. Mm-hmm. We've done events with the state of New York, with New York City, with Philadelphia, with Visit Florida, when we've gone to New Zealand and Australia, simply because we know that folks that are coming from that region of the world are going to be here for 21 days or more, and more than likely start on one end and go to the other, or vice versa.
Yep.
So why it just makes more sense to work together.
Great. So the collaboration and developing strategies to and package products, tourism products and packages for international travelers, the collaboration is definitely a necessity then to grow the revenue and share revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the business you're going to attract. There's the business you want to attract. Mm-hmm. There's the business you need to attract, which are usually those that stay longer and spend more. Mm-hmm. So the question is, one, you'll do it on your own, but the other two, you're going to look at it and say, well, how can we collaborate? What's the opportunity as a region?
Yeah.
And
and it's more attractive to, I believe, as a region, as a traveler, they don't care if they're driving through the border of Maryland to Virginia or from Virginia to DC. They're not, oh, we're crossing over now, then we can't go to DC. Or if they book a hotel in DC, or we can't go to Virginia because we're locked in here. Travelers don't care about boundaries and city boundaries or state boundaries. They want to cross over. The more they can do, the more attractive I believe the region will become. So that's very good.
I agree. Not only do they not care, they usually don't even know. Like people that fly to DC think they fly into DC. And I'm like, no, there's no airport in DC. So it's really an imaginary line that I have to look at from the standpoint of economic impact, because if they're not staying in a hotel in DC, then we don't realize the hotel tax, which is important. Mm-hmm. But as I say to the stakeholders in DC, when I'm asked, well, why do you have members out in Maryland and Virginia? I'm like, well, not every person can stay in DC for a variety of reasons. One, if they're looking at coming in April and room rates are higher, and they are looking for a lower option, I want to offer them one-stop shopping, because maybe they'll come back in August when room rates are lower, then they'll be able to stay in the city.
Right.
So
that's good. That's good. And just to stay on that topic, as far as travelers going into or tapping into the websites before they get to the destination, to do their research and so forth, there's a untapped territory that I'm wondering if tourism can ever get into that territory, and that is the online in-home services. So you're looking at grocery stores, Amazon, Walmart, Publix. You may have other stores there in DC that are doing the online grocery, and you can basically just pick whatever you want. There's a person that is at the grocery store that is shopping for you. Finish that. You can either pick up at curbside, or they can have it delivered to you at your door. There's also the cinema. Recently, Netflix and Amazon, they are now giving you the option to literally rent these movies that are in the box office playing right now. So that's something that they is still gathering, still people gathering at the supermarket, at the cinema, the box office. There are people that are rubbing shoulder to shoulder. So they have now say, you know, let's tap into this online in-home service, be it using the online platform or they're using virtual reality. Where do you see tourism tapping into this new arena? Can they?
I mean, I think that we should always explore options. I think the one thing that as you reference all that stuff is that guarantee if you went to any executive in any of those arenas in January of 2020, they would have said absolutely not.
Correct.
So to the point you made earlier in terms of changes and things we've done out of necessity, now, you know, those that release movies are going to look at, you know, like the Coming to America 2 came out today
last
on
night.
Amazon. Last night on Amazon.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know anyone who's not going to watch that. But now it's like, you know, and I love physically going to the movies. I love it. You know, it's like, but, you know, and I could go to the movies in Virginia to see it, but I'm probably my wife and I will probably watch it. And the question for them is like, okay, well, in June of 2022, when we're at a different place, or at least August of this year, you know, what will you continue to do? That's what we do in terms of looking at and tapping into markets. To your point, when Amazon announced that they were building their second campus in Virginia across the river from Washington, D.C., we established a relationship with them. You know, it's like, look, you guys have billions, nearly $1 trillion plus. Here's what we do. Here's the industry. What dynamics can we possibly explore together that could be revenue generators and for us both that make DC a more attractive destination, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And even in the meetings market, we are already doing that with Amazon. So I don't have a finite answer, but I will say that we're constantly looking at ways in which we can tap into our uncharted territories.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, it goes into the marketing and the product development as well. And we're normally marketing destination, special places, and so forth, right? Events. But what do you see as the new addition to the products that we could basically start marketing? And I'm going to say this if there were no special place, no monument, no art museum, no events, there's no beaches, and there's no theme, there's no Disney, there's none of that. As a destination, what could we market?
Gee, if you took all of that away, you have to look at, I mean, and you know, there's cities that don't have any of that. You know, they market the history of the destination, you know, and now arguably they're looking at marketing the history tied to the Black community. And here, you know, we tend to add more. Like before last year, we didn't have a Black Lives Matter Plaza. So now we market what's called protest tourism, whereas people are coming to learn more about all the things that happened over the last, you know, including January 6th in Washington, D.C., or including what happened last year, as it'll be in museums in Washington, D.C. that'll be free. So, you know, we're constantly, like our whole DC Cool campaign, you know, as I look at DC as a destination, the things that make us strong as a destination also hurt us as a destination, because monuments, memorials, and museums are great. They're free. They're amazing. It's a wonderful experience. But I argue if you sit a family of 5 down and say, do you want to go to Disney World or you want to go to Washington, D.C.? You know, we got to look at it through that lens and say, just because we think we're hot, you know, there's always someone hotter. And so therefore we got to put things in perspective and try to recreate ourselves, you know, like an outdoor experience in Washington, D.C. On a canoe or a paddle boat in the Potomac River. You know, people don't like internationally, like, oh, there's water in Washington, D.C., you know, or a bicycle ride. You know, DC is very small overall. 700,000 people live here. bicycle ride from one end to the other end through Rock Creek Park, which happens to be larger than Central Park. You know, so yeah, so there are other cities that are looking at it and saying, you know, I always say to someone when they tell me where they're from, I'm like, what's your city known for? Especially if it's not a big city like New York. And it's like, oh yeah, our city we founded root beer. There was somebody who founded root beer. And I'm always impressed when people know and they stick their chests out with pride,
of course,
as to what their small town was known for by this inventor of something. And I'm thinking, and I'm asking because that's kind of who I am, but I'm also asking to learn more about the city and learn more about the person that I'm talking to. Because the person that knows nothing about their city, you know, I'm like, oh wow, okay, you know, nothing. You know, you just grew up there, you left. You know, you ask a person from Jamaica, you can't shut y'all up.
come on, Elliott. Come on, man. Come on. What do you mean, what?
The beaches, the food, the music, the people.
What?
And that's just the beginning. I'm like, okay, you know.
But I tell you this, right? That one of the things I am seeing when I tell you that, let's strip everything away that we build, right? The museum, the art galleries, the theater, let's strip all of that away. And I love how you're able to narrow it down and say, George, let's go then to our natural resources, the river, the parks. Let's look at what we have naturally. We have land, we have water, right? So what are some of the things naturally we can look at? And the other thing I was thinking about is I wouldn't come to Washington, DC unless I'm invited by Elliott.
You will be invited, and I will take you around, George, and I will show you. You know, I will, you know, and the thing that I love the most is the fact that there are people that have come to Washington, DC several times.
Yes.
And where I take them will always blow them away because I'm always thinking about, you know, I call it DC's hidden treasures, or the things that people don't know about Washington. Like no one thinks about Washington as a place for nightlife. That's New York. That's fun. That's festive. But the number of rooftop, as we look at the growth of the city, the number of buildings that have created amazing rooftops that have amazing activation is, you know, for that younger generation that might go into a museum but really wants to go out and party. That's what we talk about. Nightlife, theater. We have the second largest number of theater seats outside of New York City. You know, sports scene here, the superlatives. When someone else says DC is the most walkable city, DC is the fittest city, DC is this, I'm like, okay, when someone else says you're hot, then you market that, because when I say it, then people expect me to say it. Yeah. So, you know, Lonely Planet said Washington, DC is the city in the top city in the world that people should visit. So the question from your peers is like, DC, really? How? And I love that because I can then expound upon it. And I'm like, well, that's why you got to come so I can share it with you. So George, my invitation is there for you to come.
I love that.
I got you.
I love the peer marketing and let the people of the city or the destination become almost an asset. They become the attraction. You know, I wasn't traveling to Jamaica for a while because of the pandemic, right? But there are loved ones and families that are there, and to believe you me, I'm going to shift it a little bit to the youth, toward the millennials.
Okay.
Are there more opportunities now for millennials to be at the table when it comes to strategy, development, policies in the industry?
Yeah, I think that the reality is that these generations are now appreciated more than we were in terms of what we bring to the table, and that has nothing to do with race. It has a lot to do with, you know, the way we were raised. You don't come in and have a voice. When I was coming into the system, and although I had a voice, I created a voice, but that's usually not the case. Whereas now, you know, I'm challenging people to, you know, these kids are really, I mean, we were smart, but they're equally as smart and they have a lot to offer. And so they're being given access, and rightfully so, to to things that perhaps other generations, including mine, did not have. So yes.
Rethink tourism. This is it. There's no boundaries. There's no financial barriers. There's nothing to stop you. If you could rethink tourism, what would that look like? And also, what will the new mindset of the travelers look like? I mean, they're already changing their mindset. So rethink it. Paint that picture for me. All yours.
Oh, wow. Jeez. Well, I will say this. My job is to always rethink ways of which I can attract different tourists or more visitors to the city. Mm-hmm. So rethinking it is reoccurring, and there's no 5-year strategic plan tied to being successful in rethinking tourism, because you're really dealing with whatever variables are thrown at you. Mm-hmm. You know, we talked about some of them today: natural disasters, man-made disasters and occurrences, and then of course technology, which continues to change, not replace, but change how people enjoy travel. Mm-hmm. So there's just no easy way to say, if you're not on an annual basis, if not every 6 months, sitting down and thinking about whatever assets you have, whatever changes to whatever your product is or city is, selling it differently, going after a different market, leveraging whatever's happening. I've talked about protest tourism. Mm-hmm. If I said something about protest tourism 2 years ago, it sounded like protest tourism. That doesn't sound like it's appealing at all. Mm-hmm. So I would say my non-answer to your question is you should always be rethinking tourism and ways in which you should go after your different markets.
Elliott, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, man.
I appreciate
Absolutely.
it.